Dr. Dubroy, I would like to start with you. What do you think are the biggest three key takeaways out of the interactions that we've actually had? Are there any implementable ideas from your point of view that can be really taken up? Any research ideas the way forward?
Well, three takeaways. Every conference should always have a takeaway which says that there must be another conference. So I think that would be the first takeaway. I think the second would be, it was a very useful learning experience for me. I think, unless I'm wrong, this was the first conference of its kind.
Can we just be a little quieter? Thank you. Thank you.
Unless I'm wrong, I think this was the first conference of its kind where you had the inside view, inside being defined as government, and you had quite a few people from the Government of India speaking in different sessions, sometimes virtually. But you also had the outside view. And the outside view is important not only because it is sometimes critical, as it should be, but also because it brings a new perspective. And some of the sessions and some of the papers that were presented brought to me new insights. So I think it would be extremely useful to have these up on the net or wherever in some form that is readily accessible. If there are papers, it would be a good idea to get them published because some of them, as I said, brought new insights. I think the third takeaway, if there is going to be a sequel, is perhaps to have something with some degree of focus. Now, what I mean by that is if it's going to be a 2-day conference next time round, every once in a while, people came up with this idea of India being a federation, concurrent list, 7 schedule, the states being important. So if there were to be a second version of this conference, it would perhaps be a good idea to have the second day exclusively focused on the states. Because the states sort of entered this peripherally. But to understand what is going on in the states, what is going on in India, it is important to get a perspective from the states, and perhaps it might be a good idea to not only invite people from the Government of India. You want to drop people from the Government of India next time around, drop Arvind, don't drop me. But
that's an excellent idea.
It would be a good idea to get representation from the states also. So those, I think, would be the 3 takeaways.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dubroy. Dr. Virmani, what are your big 3 takeaways out of the discussions?
I generally don't believe in takeaways. So let me tell you what I basically came here, I retired from government, IMF, whatever, in end of 2012, and I've been out of this world for 10 years. So I basically accepted your invitation. I'll be very frank. I don't believe in diplomatic words. I've never done it in my life. And I came here to see what people were thinking, and I got that, okay? So how they are thinking, what they are thinking about is what I got out of it, which is extremely useful for me. As I said, I've been out of it. And, as an economist, I think of the marginal cost of information and knowledge is free, it's zero, right? You have to know what is out there to be able to go and find it in a way, right? So that was the second part. I did hear several people who gave me a new lead, and hopefully I will learn further from them. So that's the second one. The third one, which don't mind me, but in some sense you need to do the reverse also, right? Which is in a way partly what Vivek has just said, that even myself, I don't exclude myself, what is happening at the state level, I'm not sure either me or you all here have an idea. So probably getting more people from the states to talk about what's happening there. So that's the third one. So I've given you 3.
Okay, and do you want to actually disagree with Dr. De Bruyne and say that not to invite him and to invite you?
No. He is a much better. Look, now I have a problem. Generally, as government, he's a past master at speaking and a diplomat. Let me also make it a little more humorous. When I came in my old days, I used to be completely open to the media. I mean, this is my excuse for lecturing all of you in the morning. I used to give them lessons. Basically, if they came and interview me, they're thinking of some scoop which they'll get from me. They never got it, but I used to give them a nice lecture, make them understand the economics of whatever the government was doing. And they would go away quite happy. I had a whole big fan following. When I came back this time, I said, okay, for a couple of months, I'm not going to do that, partly for the reason why, what I just told you. So I'm not really criticizing you in any way. But I wanted to get back up to speed. I don't like to speak about things I have no idea about, And there are many things, and that's why I'm sorry, but I refuse to answer questions on climate because I don't know anything about it. I've not studied it, I don't speak. So 3 weeks ago, the budget, you're familiar with the budget, right? So after the budget, I said, okay, I'm ready. I have started going to giving interviews, but I will not go to a conference. I will not participate in a discussion because I'm not ready for it. But I came here, and I'm happy that I came here. So, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Dasher. So, Richard, over to you.
Okay.
Your takeaways.
Okay, so first of all, I'm the outsider here, right? I will say that I've made my career observing different regions of Asia as an outsider and getting more and more involved with government, involved with higher education, and involved with the business world. So I think that this is an incredibly important kind of conference for us to have in Silicon Valley. I will say that to begin with. And I also want to say what an honor it is to have people like Dr. De Bruyne and Dr. Vermani come and speak with us. That's a huge plus. We could, thank you so much. There's a couple of things that, as an outsider, I want to note and maybe emphasize as we go forward. First of all, what we have talked about in the last 2 days can only be called a miracle. So that term was used more for China, right, starting 10 or 12 years ago. And yet, I think that the miracle that is India is even more impressive because you're attempting to retain the benefits of diversity. You're attempting to have an enriching kind of really socially inclusive way to move forward. That's really exciting. But if I can say one thing that is absolutely important to do for everyone from India from now, start to think now about what your place in the world is going to be. It was mentioned a number of times that India can be a model for the South or India can be a model for other countries. How do you want to promote that model? How do you become that model? This is not trivial. It's something where if you look at what did go on in China, the Belt and Road Initiative, I think is a failure because it basically looks like it's doing nothing more than supporting Chinese companies. So I think that thinking now about how to be the model for the world is absolutely critical for India. There's one other thing that I have to say that's cautionary, and that reflects our experience here in the United States over the last 5 or 6 years. So you have wonderful leadership in India, and things are getting done because of the leadership in India. And that is absolutely a treasure, and it's wonderful to hear how this is working out. It's very important to develop the institutions that can survive less good leadership. The institutions that can survive the kind of negative inclinations among humanity that you get. It is absolutely critical for India to keep the good things that it has, no matter who is in the government in Delhi. And so I hope that we can continue to focus on the sort of institutional framework and the way that India is moving forward. I think about Vivek's comment about we should get rid of the bottom of the bureaucracy. And okay, that's not doable, right? You can't get rid of the bottom of the bureaucracy, but how do you transform them, right? So there's a lot for us to talk about, not just for academic study, but for action as we go forward. And I want to thank everyone who has participated here from the bottom of my heart. And yes, we will have a sequel.
Oh, yes. Yes, Dr. Debroy, you wanted to add something to that.
No, I just wanted to react to what Richard has said about the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is, of course, much maligned for legitimate reasons. But let's just think of the numbers. The total number of people employed in the government today in India is 20 million. That's it. 3 million union government, 3 million central public sector enterprises, and state governments, local government put together the rest. 20 million out of a workforce of something like 480 million. And it's a number that one should remember. So far as the much maligned lower level bureaucracy is concerned, wherever things have become transparent, whenever there has been greater usage of information technology to reduce the human interface, the rent seeking and the bribery has gone. You will see it in the case, if not gone completely, vastly reduced. You will see it in the case of import-export transactions. You will see it in the case of foreign exchange. You will see it in the case of indirect taxes. Most of the time, when people come to local government, half the time at least, when people come to local government, it is not to enforce the rules, but it is to bend the rules in my favor when that discretion exists. The bureaucracy primarily exists in India, and the corruption primarily exists in India in an area that has not yet been reformed completely, which is land conversion, real estate transactions, building regulations. In most other areas, things have become fairly transparent, including payment of taxes, including payment of municipal taxes, not uniformly throughout the country, but let us also recognize the improvements that have happened.
Well said. Thank you. Very. Yes, Dr. Virmani.
Yeah, just actually more seriously, there's one area which I kind of hinted at in my talk. The focus is on one problem, one issue, one solution. There is not enough analysis and thinking which could benefit. I don't know whether you are equipped to do it. But the interconnections which happen, there was a lot of talk about the broad interconnections, but there are a lot of interconnections in the economy. Unless you understand, for example, the details of the GST or the customs, you don't understand how many sectors it affects, you know. We always think one sector at a time, okay? So just to give you a particular example, I've met the Apple people. We talked about, some of you have mentioned the supply chain IT, Apple and other electronic manufacturers, the mobile system, it's been talked about, right? They came to me and talked about their customs duty structure, you know, in terms of shifting the supply chains, etc. I thought all of you knew about it. That's why I'm using that example. Now, you know, the individual industries always know their thing, but nobody thinks of the fact that the whole structure of customs duties affects a whole bunch of industries, you know. So the kind of what I call macro, I don't know what you call it in business schools. Same thing with GST. Unless you look at it, it will affect so many different things. You never see it. Unless you're talking to one particular industry, they'll just mention their thing. So there are a lot of issues like that which few people are focusing on. I'm just telling you an area you wanted to know where to go. So for example, electricity prices. It's a state subject, but you know, nobody has documented either just physically or economically what is the negative effect of the kind of pricing structure is there in states. So, you know, things which have large effects, macro effects, not one-to-one sort of a thing, that stuff is under-researched, it's under-investigated. If you get a chance to get into those areas, I would suggest you try doing that. That's my serious suggestion.
Yeah. And just one last question before we close the panel. But what do you think individuals can do to really, in terms of like collective consciousness for growth in India? Any ideas on that? People like us, people within the country, people out here, what do you think they could actually do to contribute towards the growth of India?
Towards the growth of India?
Yeah.
You mean the insiders or the outsiders?
Both of them.
Well, look, I don't know whether I'm answering your question. I'm just making a statement, and then I'll try and see if I can answer your question. We've spoken a lot about reforms. Reforms are about competition. Reforms are about liberalization. It's a complete myth to say that reforms are win-win. There is no reform which is Pareto superior. Reforms are win-lose. So if reforms are not happening, it is some vested interest which is going to lose its privileges, which is opposing the reforms. This does not get articulated enough within the country, that what is the loss from the status quo. And this feeds into the political system, because after all, in a democracy like ours, which is an indirect democracy, governments indirectly do what people want them to do. So therefore, the argument for reforms, the argument against the status quo is not sufficiently articulated within the country. And what people, particularly who form public opinion, what people who write in various media outlets, what they ought to be doing is to highlighting this. I think for the outsider, there is a lot that has changed in India. There is a lot in India that's a little bit positive. And sometimes this does not always get articulated outside the country, because outside the country sometimes one uses data or information that's slightly out of date. In this day and age, it's of course reasonably easy to keep abreast of what is happening in India. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that everyone should applaud what is happening in India from the rooftops and proclaim that India is shining. But there is a positive story also to be told.
Thank you. Dr. Virmani.
I think I've made my point unless there's what.
No,
you
so
have
just
another.
in terms of how do you think individuals from inside and outside of India can contribute?
Well, I
You
agree
concur
with
with him.
what Vivek has said. The information, again, I thought I just say these things on Twitter, not in a conference, but maybe it's the same thing now. It's all mixed up in my head. So yes, I mean, I am fighting information war on Twitter. I don't do it in public like this, but so I agree with him. And again, I've mentioned this before. There, I'm not very diplomatic. He is very polite and finds the right words. I can't, so I don't want to say any further on it. But that is true. That is a fact. I mean, I'll give you one example. I mean, I have done a paper a year ago with 2 other co-authors which includes poverty, income distribution. It's an IMF working paper, for God's sake. How many people who talk about income and poverty have heard of it? Okay.
Got it.
What to do? I mean,
Sure.
it's not as if it's in my private foundation somewhere. It's in the IMF papers. So if people can't even find that, is there something small going on there? I don't know.
Sure. And Richard,
So
anything from
briefly-
your side?
Yeah, so in general, I think that individuals play into any sort of a major change, first of all, by holding the institutions accountable. That is an individual responsibility. It is something that you can only have an impact collectively, but it's your responsibility to see how the government is doing, to see how industry is behaving. That is a general point. For here in Silicon Valley, we have the most wonderful opportunity to have the kind of ultimate T-shaped knowledge, where you have a deep knowledge about some sector or about some topic or about some field, and you also have the ability to have wonderful broad knowledge and connections all across this community. As we go forward, I'm hoping that we will create this kind of a T-shape so that we don't become too narrow, too closed, and yet we don't lose the depth either. So that's the balance I'm hoping for going forward.
Great. And as all things have to come to a close, I just wanted to share a couple of things. It's not working.
I don't think you're on.
No, I don't think so. There's something.
Time is over.
It is just about to close. So just a couple of takeaways from my side. I think a great learning experience, but as Dr. Debroy and Dr. Virmani was actually saying, we need to do something in the States, but I think this was a great conference where amazing associations were made and amazing dialogues were happening on the sides. And of course, as we move forward, 22nd February, 23rd February, 2024, in fact, you're invited, so I'm going to extend the invite to both of you. I'll leave the fight to both of you to decide. But Dr. Virmani, Dr. Debroy, it will be a pleasure and honor for us to have you again back here. But in terms of the outcomes, it's very clear that we are going to come out with the compendium. There is a working paper series coming out. There is a book that is going to be out, and there is a magazine issue that is going to be out. So it should be out within the next 3 months. And thanks everybody for contributing papers to it. And so thanks a lot for joining in. But before I close, I really wanted 5 people on the background to just stay there. So there is Kimberly, there is Brianna, there is Neera, and if I can have Sheen and so can I get Sheen, and can you just go back there, please, and Natalia. And I think these are and Neera, can you please join them there? And can we just stand up and look at the back and say thank you to them, because they have just been the reason for the great success of the conference. Thanks, everybody. This has just been a lovely journey for the last 2 days, but I think it has been a lovely journey with Richard and the team here for the last 2.5 months. It was a hectic effort, but I think we just had an amazing experience. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to welcoming you next year.
Again over
and keep the conversations going. Thank you.
Dinner.